Hi everyone, this is Kirthi joining you from Chennai, and I'm super excited to moderate today's panel on intersections of gender equality, feminism, women's rights, migration, politics, peace, society, and literature. That was quite a mouthful. But I have some amazing women with me on today's conversation, and I do hope to keep their voices front and center over my own. So I'm going to take a backseat for a second and just call on all of our speakers to do a quick round of introductions before we begin today's conversations. So I see Radhika before me. Radhika, would you like to go first and just keep a 1 minute introduction in front of us about yourself and your work?
Hi, Kirthi. Hi, everyone. And I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually a little giddy with joy seeing myself amongst all these wonderful people. For myself, I'm a writer, a mother, a freelance trainer, and because I'm a typical Pisces, most of the time I'm just a daydreamer. I live in Penang currently, but this video is coming to you from Dhaka because that's where I'm stuck at the moment thanks to COVID. And I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion and learning so much from you, Kirthi, as I always do.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Radhika. Shazaf, would you like to say hi?
Yes, I would like to say hello, and I'd just like to say that I have written 2 novels in the process of writing the third one, and I have 3 children and a stepson, so 4 children, and I'm exhausted, so I'm going to pass it on to the next person.
That's introduction enough. Thank you, Shazaf. Soniah, hello.
Hi, so wonderful to be with all these amazing panelists. Thank you for having me on this festival. I'm going to do the very boring thing and read out my bio because I don't know what else to do, so I'll super speed read it. It's always interesting doing third person. Soniah Kamal is an award-winning novelist, essayist, and public speaker. Her most recent novel, Unmarriageable, Pride and Prejudice in Pakistan, a post-colonial retelling, is a Financial Times Reader's Best Book of 2019, a People magazine pick, a 2019 Books All Georgians Should Read, a 2020 Georgia Author of the Year for Literary Fiction nominee. It is shortlisted for the 2020 Towson Award for Fiction and is a New York Public Library and NPR Code Switch 2019 Summer Pick and more. Her debut novel, An Isolated Incident Set Against the Kashmir Conflict Backdrop, was a finalist for the Towson Award for Fiction and the KLF French Fiction Prize. Soniah's TEDx talk is about second chances, and We Are the Ink, her address at a US citizenship oath ceremony, is about transitions, and her keynote at the Jane Austen Festival is about feminism and global connections. Soniah's work has appeared in critically acclaimed anthologies and publications, including the New York Times, Catapult, Guardian, Georgia Review, Vida, BuzzFeed, and more. And for more, you can go to soniahkamal.com.
Thank you so much for that, Soniah. I think that was a very innovative way of introducing yourself.
When I'm asked to introduce and I didn't know to do this, I would just start not good. This is the best thing to do for me.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable with us. I see Yousra. Yousra, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hello. Again, I feel absolutely honoured to be on this panel with a whole number of female writers and authors that I've admired for like a really long time. So this is a lovely opportunity. I'm Yousra. I'm a British Egyptian journalist. I'm now based in West Yorkshire. But before that, I lived for 15 years in Qatar in the Gulf. And my first semi-autobiographical novel came out just in November of last year called Hijab and Red Lipstick. And it's a tale of what life is like as a young woman under the guardianship system.
That's amazing. Thank you, Yousra. And I also see Mandy. Hi, Mandy. We're just doing a round of introductions. So if you could just unmute and introduce yourself in under a minute, we'll get started after.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kirthi, and thank you, Sabine. It's a great honour and a great privilege to be supporting Team Anarchy again. I'm Mandy Sanghera, an international human rights activist from the UK who travels all over the world tackling gender equality, empowering the next generation of women, and making sure that I send the elevator down and make sure that other women are following me. It's a great honour, and somebody who loves reading an awful lot and who's going to be really excited to be listening to all of you amazing ladies. So that's me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mandy. What we have here is a mix of women who write and women who use the written word in their activism. So today's conversation is largely going to center on the broad theme of intersectionality, but drawing from each of the authors and individual activists' work. So I'm going to go over to Mandy to open up our conversation. And Mandy, my question to you is, As a global campaigner, as somebody who works in advocacy, how do you see literature as something that can support feminist and peace advocacy?
So books have been, the driving force for women around the world, and actually feminist and, campaigners like myself, we use it for research. We learn about putting pen to paper, talking about issues, and really being able to talk about issues that are affecting women, especially women of color. And it's great to see this platform here today. But actually, I don't know, but, recently in the UK and while being on lockdown this year, we have seen Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale, come to surface again. And it's actually brought a lot of issues to the surface that actually are just as important today as they were all those years ago when I read that book in the 90s. And then I've seen people like Phyllis, and we've lost a great campaigner from Egypt, as you all know. And there are some feminists who have gone before us, who have really led the way, who have actually really campaigned on issues that are about equality, tackling the issues that women need a seat at the table. And I feel like, we need, the next generation to come up behind us and talk about issues, because things that were affecting women 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I first started campaigning, are still just as important, if not even more important. And I've also seen that actually books and literature and research and getting good data and good quality records of issues affecting women is really like gold dust, because actually, whether you go into social work or into doing psychology or anything else like that, in any educational field or even international development, the feminist movement is really, really important. And also, as we looked in the United States last year and the year before that in the UK, the right of women to vote. So actually, women have really been leading the way. And actually, when we look at some of those books, we are still fighting for women to have their voice, to be involved in elections. We have seen that women still are not being represented in positions of leadership. So all of those issues are still here today. So I think it's really important, Kirthi, and I think that, they are a great resource, and it's great to learn from history, but it's also about moving with the times. And, I've got a lot of favorites, and I'm going to be interviewing one of my favorite feminists of all time is Phyllis later on this evening. And she's written 20 books, and she's really talked about issues around honor killing, talking about violence against women, which are real issues affecting women today. And even though she started many years ago before I did, and that, like I said, these issues are here. And I think, women are able to share their experience, their knowledge, their expertise with other women. So I feel that it's a real great way to get your message across.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing from Mandy's words here is that the personal is political, where you get your words across and that becomes a tool of advocacy for others. So from here, I want to go over to Radhika to flip the camera a bit and look at it from the other side. As an author, Radhika, what are your thoughts on how a reader should consume feminist writing? Radhika, you're on mute. I think this is the sentence of the year.
Yes, it is. Hi, sorry. Yeah, that's an excellent question, Kirthi. And I think I'm going to start my answer with two words: personal filters. Just the other day, a fellow feminist and a writer friend and I, we were having the discussion about all the rage in the feminist writing, all these books that we read, and how, as a reader, it is very easy for us to just get caught in that rage and remain wedged there. And while there is ample cause for all that anger, of course, we as a gender have been enduring much more than our fair share and keeping mum about it for far too long. As a reader, we must also understand that the rage is just the starting point, right? And it must flow elsewhere to a place of meaning and change. So, we were discussing how it's just like lava, really, in that it seeds and festers for decades and even millennia, and then one day it erupts. And when it does, it flows and it decimates everything in its path, and people run away. But then it cools down and it becomes something solid and something beautiful, and actually even something fertile. Because when the eruption has come out, so many other elements that weren't there, potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, what have you. Science wasn't my thing. But then all these people who ran away start coming back, because they realize the soil is much more fertile now. It's much more enriched. And it has greater value purely because of that eruption that they feared and hated. So it's quite like that. I mean, as a reader, when we read feminist writing, we should try and get past all that anger and all that sorrow, which a lot of these stories, the path that a lot of these stories take, and understandably so, and go all the way where that rich soil is. And for this, we need to apply our own personal filters of what I believe is a person and what to me is right. For the sake of an example, while feminism taught me that I am equal to men and I deserve all the opportunities that they deserve, my personal filter, and because I'm a pacifist and I'm against all forms of war, also kind of told me that I cannot possibly just be okay with women joining the armed forces. I can't. And I'm not trying to dismiss this important milestone in our fight to equality. It was great. In fact, I cheered heartily when Indian Navy got their pilots, female pilots, first female pilot just 2 years ago. And that was fantastic. But something inside me tells me that it has to be more than that. We have to take it to an end that menfolk in this world cannot without us. And I think Madeleine Rees puts it wonderfully in her talk that war at the end of it is gendered. Men fight and kill, women nurture and protect. I mean, this is an argument I make all the time, that women have as much access to guns as men do. And let's face it, we have far more to be angry about than they do. But how many gun crimes are committed by women? And so it's just who we are. So my end game as a feminist should not just be to win that seat on the national defense table. It should be to change the very nature of debate on that table. Why is war necessary at all? Why should millions and millions of people die for the geopolitical or eco-political designs of a few? Why aren't we using this money, for example, to solve the problems of poverty or healthcare? So what I should do is fundamentally change and raise the level of the debate. And it should seem like we've arrived and now we're going to have a completely different discussion. But the other suggestion that I also want to make, and it's an important part of what happens if for us to be able to do, the first thing is to diversify our intake. So we must read what everybody else reads, but we should also read beyond that. We should especially read what nobody else is reading and bring forth the stories that nobody's talking about. Because Kirthi, I've actually shocked some sworn feminists into a heart attack when I said that Middle East is not just about burqa bans and driving, burqas and driving bans and all that stuff. It's much more than that. In fact, women in Middle Eastern universities outnumber men by a big margin. In fact, especially in STEM subjects. Or for that matter, that the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner before Malala took over that distinction was Tawakkul Karman from Yemen. And we don't know about her, and we should. And she wasn't from the Western world. It wasn't a man. She was a woman, and she was from Yemen, Middle East. So it helps us to know these things that are not being talked about in the common narrative. For example, sometimes I just give a list of countries to people and I'm like, I go, okay, so Rwanda, Cuba, Bolivia, UAE, Namibia, Mozambique, Tunisia, what's common about them? And they're shocked to hear that all of these countries have more women in the parliament than US of A. So it helps to know these things that nobody else knows, and it helps you to build a unique perspective that which, using your personal filters, you can use to see, all right, so now I have this equal opportunity and I have this power. What am I going to do with it?
It's beautiful. Thank you, Radhika, and also for your allusion to the fact that gender equality is more than just adding women and stirring into the conversation. So from there, Radhika talked so powerfully about rage, really putting that rage out there. And as consumers of that, what are we going to do with that rage? I want to go over to Shazaf. And Shazaf, my question to you is, one of the themes you really strongly aligned with in your writing is the cultivation of empathy. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how feminism and peace work that can benefit amply from the cultivation of empathy. How does one go about writing about a value like empathy? And I'd really love to hear your process if you're okay with sharing that.
Yes, thank you, Kirthi. It's really interesting, Radhika, and you have just talked about rage, and I have been consumed by rage, and I will start from there, and then I will go on to the answer. So yesterday I had a very, very rough night with my twins, and I was up most of the night, and I'm afraid to say I shouted and was a bit mad, I was a bit mad. And then I tweeted about it, and immediately 2 friends who are in the social work department WhatsApped me and said, take those off because you can't talk about that. Because in this country, social services, anybody can report you and social services can end up at your door. And I was already devastated and I was talking about it and I had to take it off because there was a fear. Mandy also talked about the Handmaid's Tale. And I felt a bit like, silenced and self-censored because a lot of people said, no, but I don't curse, but I don't do this. This is very relatable, but I don't do it. Everybody was sort of hurtling over themselves to say, I understand you, but don't talk about it. I understand you, but don't talk about it. So, and one of the things that one of my friends who's very dear said that social services in this country does not have much empathy or understanding towards motherhood. So once my kids are older and cannot be taken away from me, I will write about this. But right now I will speak no more, which is a shame. You asked about empathy and sort of how it helps. And I would go towards, there are two aspects of writing, which is reading and writing. And I would throw the question back at you, does reading make people better people? I'm not terribly sure. Hannibal Lecter, for example, was a great reader and he ate people. And so I feel like these are these things that are easy to say. But I find that many readers read the same narrative, look for the same narrative to confirm their own prejudices or their own points of view. And it takes an act of radical, it takes a radical act of rebellion, actually, in order to read something that you are uncomfortable with, something that you know nothing about. That's where I would come. And so that's what you say, the importance of empathy. And I'm going to just link that with what you said about the feminist movement. I feel like sometimes all over the world, including here and in Pakistan, because actually I've been I've known many I am a feminist, but I've known many people who actively work for women's organization in Pakistan. And I have seen how a lack of empathy has affected it. For example, over here, there was a really good book called Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. And she basically talks about how white women have left Black women behind. And she says, there's this great sentence where she says, you can't lean in and climb to the top of the CEO ladder when basically you're trying to survive. So it leaves a lot of people behind, you see. And I'm scarred by an incident where, and this, by the way, this is not all feminists and women are doing great work in Pakistan, but this one incident that I'm going to have to, you always describe the thing that should not have happened. And so is that I remember that there was this organization where they were talking about, it was a charity event to raise awareness about women and empowerment. And all the ladies on stage were from a class that really were not affected by the issues that they were talking about. And there were saris and blow dries and lipsticks and everything. The red lipsticks, Yousra. And, and then they brought in a field worker, someone who had buried girls, someone who had protected abused women, someone who had talked about women turned out of their homes completely. And she got emotional. She started crying and she was hushed because it was not sexy. It was not a camera moment. You see, so this what she talks about in Hood Feminism, I have seen, and so I think empathy, when it comes to reading and writing, I don't know. I honestly don't know how it affects people because the person who had empathy in that room probably didn't read and write, but she had gone and lived the lives of the women whom she was representing. Okay. The second question I think you were asking was about my process. I forgot what you were saying. Could you just...
my question was really, how do you cultivate empathy in your writing? How do you write about something like that?
Is it okay if I criticize my own writing? I feel like it's very difficult. So how it happened was very much me writing what I knew, okay, which was about a middle-class girl from an Urdu-speaking Shia Sayyid family who was facing lots of marriage proposals and, the satire of the marriage market. And I was able to say a lot. And I feel like the best novels are ones in which the writer is being authentic and sincere and not trying to represent. I don't think it's possible to represent people. when you're writing. When you're writing, it's either through a character or it's either through your own lens, and that can have immense value. It can liberate. It can, other readers, I think, and I know that some people have said that it really made them question the whole process. But I think the transformative power of what I have seen is laughter. I think that if anything can make you laugh, it can make you conquer some sort of tragedy or something like that. In terms of, I think that's the answer. I think, sorry, so what I was trying to say was that the second novel I wrote was a challenge to myself to write about absolutely nothing that I knew. Like, I didn't, something that I had not experienced with. So I wrote about jinn and supernatural elements and all of that. But again, feminist elements of women feeling vulnerable came in because the villainous jinn is basically a metaphor for a sexual predator. Because what he likes to do is he likes to breathe out the scent of women, of girls who have just menstruated, and then possess them. And so if you want to go deeper into it, it's peddled as children's fiction, so you couldn't really go deep into it, but it's there. The first thing that young girls who are growing into women have to face is the specter of the man who will want to rape, the man who will want to consume. And so while I have not, I'm very lucky, I have not ever been in the experience of that, but again, it came as a natural part of the story. So when you talk about reading and writing and empathy, I think the only thing to do is to be as truthful and sincere to your experiences and let the story take over. Because the minute you see people trying to represent a particular class, they tend to not only override that class, but also use them for their own purposes.
Absolutely.
And that's what I have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shazaf. And thank you for being vulnerable by putting your personal story in the context as well. I think it speaks to how systems and structures instrumentalize motherhood to normalize procreation as the accepted form of motherhood, but everything else is just simply unacceptable. I'm sorry you had to go through that. But drawing from some of the points that Shazaf shared, which was centered on empathy and staying authentic and true, I want to go over to Soniah, who did something super interesting, which is to retell a British novel through a South Asian lens. And I think in so many ways that is staying authentic to the ethos you are part of, but I think it's also a huge act of subversion. So what's the decolonization of literature?
What was your last bit? What is the decolonization of literature?
No, so I was going to say, what can the decolonization of literature offer to the feminist movement?
I very much wrote Unmarriageable. It's a parallel post-colonial retelling. And when I was much younger and I was doing my own reading and research and stuff, I came across Babington Macaulay's Minute on Education, in which his address to British Parliament in 1835, in which he recommends that English replace all of the indigenous languages, becomes the official language throughout British Empire, and in effect become the language of privilege, opportunity, and whatnot. And English, actually, even though I come from an Urdu speaking background and my mother is Kashmiri speaking, so I've grown up with both languages at home by dint of having moved around in my life a lot. English is my first language. And to see the almost very, very distressing origins of this language, which were meant to turn me into what Macaulay wanted, which was, neither a brown person, but white in sensibility. It affected me very deeply because English is my language. And moreover, it's a Pakistani language because in 1947, Pakistan turned English into an official language. So even though there's a lot of linguistic divide in Pakistan between the classes, and I mean, divide and rule still, I think, very much does happen on linguistic lines here. English is nevertheless, it's not an other language or it's not a foreign language. It's very much Pakistani language because it was declared an official language. Nevertheless, I had to reconcile with this in my own sphere and terms, and the extreme need to write a post-colonial retelling was born from there. And yes, I took, I'm a Jane Austen fan. I'm very active in the diversity inclusion committee. I'm a member of the Jane Austen Society of North America, very active member. So I'm definitely a Jane Austen fan. But, Pride and Prejudice, I go so far as to say, is perhaps the most beloved British classic in the canon, Western canon at the moment. And what I wanted to do was take the English language that I'd grown up with its nefarious origins, and fuse it with the culture that I knew. So a book that, a Pakistani book written in English, something that it was just not available when I was growing up, and for the longest time. And therefore very much a project of subversion, though I prefer the terms reorienting, remapping, writing back perhaps to empire. And so it's parallel insofar as that it's not, it wasn't some cute little project, fun project for me. And it was very intimidating to do what I planned to do, which was take the exact plot, all the characters, and literally retransplant it in Pakistani society, culture, whatnot. Because, and actually Professor Nalini Iyer at Seattle University, she read Unmarriageable, reviewed it and stuff, and she called it Macaulay's worst nightmare. And I think that is by far the biggest compliment Unmarriageable could receive in so many respects. But as a South Asian, as someone from the subcontinent, as a Pakistani, affiliated writer and stuff, it is, for those of us who come from our history, from this particular history, we know what that means in every frame. And so, yeah, your question was subversion, very much. That was definitely very, very much subversion. As far as then what post-colonial literature, and I also want to say here that the term post-colonial has always interested me, because yes, we are Pakistan, and I can speak about Pakistan per se, but Pakistan is very much a post-colonial nation when it comes, when you see it in terms of British Empire. But the fact is there's so many different types of colonialists, and definitely things step in. I mean, you have gender colonialism, you have class divides, which is a colonialism in itself. You have linguistic colonialism. So when are we ever really post? We're always present in one form of post, one form of colonialism or the other. So post is an interesting thing. It's an interesting label to come under, because we think, British Empire is gone, everything's fine, everything's whatever. And as we see the ground reality of our, the subcontinent, of the regions that we belong to and our neighbors and stuff, certainly there's still reverberations of the British Empire, but where we might have been post, we're very much colonized in different ways. Physically, when it comes to border, when it comes to not being able to get visas and crossing, but also in our mind, there's still so much division between, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I mean, we didn't just have one partition, which is 47. We had 1971 also, and the role that West Pakistan played in this division definitely needs to be acknowledged, needs to be talked about. In fact, there was supposed to be in Pakistan a conference about Bangladesh and what happened last week, but it was banned. So we're still, when it comes, so then where's the power? Where's this post-colonialism? What is being colonized here? And as far as in feminist terms, I mean, it's always amusing to me when it comes to the Aurat March, the Women's March in Pakistan. I attended it physically in 2019. I was there for a festival, and I happened to be there in that time period. And it was amazing to me to see all the women across the caste divide, with men also participate. I mean, people forget. Feminism is not just women. Feminism is men also. Feminism means equality of choice and freedom and stuff. It by no means that women want to rule over men or anything silly like that. It's basically just having equality with each other and respect within that equality. In my first novel, An Isolated Incident, which is set against the Kashmir conflict between, India and Pakistan, an ongoing conflict, very, very hard to write about an ongoing conflict. But my main character is actually, she undergoes gang rape in that, and her entire family is murdered. And I had to write within the feminine constraints of what it means to come from that sort of history and yet stand up for yourself and make a new family, and what all of that means, because that is feminism also. Feminism is standing up for yourself. And with Unmarriageable, it is it is very much a feminist novel. It's about I think Austen wrote a feminist novel also. It's about a mother, and it's about 3 daughters, and this mother is desperate to get her daughters married, whether her daughters want to get married or not. And what does marriage mean in this context? Does marriage mean what does a suitable boy, to bring Vikram Seth into it, because he seems to own this title at this point. But what does this mean? What does it mean to be a good girl, a suitable girl? What does it mean to look for a suitable boy, a suitable, everything suitable? And within the terms of feminism, what does that mean? We know traditionally what it means, which is to fit a certain border and parameter of don't do this. It's always don't do this, don't do that, don't go out. What were you wearing? Where are you going? What time will you be back? We live our lives so much in the subcontinent, or at least in Pakistan, in the boundaries of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I think feminism in Unmarriageable is the permission to give oneself, do this, do go out, do go to cafes, do go to the theater, do go jogging in the park, which is what all my characters in Unmarriageable do, because I wanted to write a novel that reflected the way I grew up in Pakistan, as well as my, the contemporary women, a lot of women in Pakistan do grow up. Back to, Shazaf mentioned the class divides and stuff. And one thing I wanted to emphasize in Unmarriageable, and I brought in, characters from the upper class, the lower middle class, because there is no one Pakistan. There are many, many Pakistans within Pakistan. And often, sometimes the classes don't cross. But I have best friends, my Elizabeth Bennett and my Charlotte Lucas, Alice and Sherry. One is from the upper class, one is from the lower class. And my Dawn.com is a national newspaper in Pakistan. And the reviewer, Nusrat Kamal, no relative, I had no idea she was writing the review. She actually said that I'm the first, perhaps, Anglophile author who got the class divisions absolutely spot on right. And that was a huge compliment for me, because I worked on that. Because I think when we talk about feminism...
I'm so sorry, but I have to
interrupt
you here because of the time. We do need to bring Yousra in on this as well. But it was so beautiful to listen to you talk about the question of whether the post-colonial really exists. So I really want to go over to another challenge around the idea of colonialism, which is gaze. And here I'd really like to bring Yousra in. Yousra, you speak of patriarchies in the home and patriarchal structures like those involved in migration in your writing, specifically in terms of how it comes to head with the agency of women. So what are your thoughts on the subversion of the gaze towards the oppressed migrant woman trope, as we see? And how can the agency of a writer like yourself subvert that?
So, funnily enough, this is something that I've been pondering over for months now. I think it's really a challenge because, as someone that's Middle Eastern and visibly Muslim, I feel like both the Middle Eastern community that I come from and the Muslim community I come from, when they know that I'm a writer, there's like this expectation that I should represent all of them, and that I, through my writing, should be proving to the West that everything's okay in our community, women are not oppressed, and that's been very challenging. That's been quite difficult. So that's like one battle that you're having to fight, and then there's the second battle where you do have the gaze of the West on your writing, with the West trying to make assumptions about you as a Middle Eastern or as a South Asian or a Muslim woman. And when you write about the realities of the experience as a migrant woman, and when those realities are quite dark and uncomfortable, you're very aware that some readers might accuse you of sort of providing fuel to the fire of the West. So it has felt like a bit of a challenge and a burden at times, but I think reflecting on what Shazaf Fatima was saying, and that's something that I really identify with, is that I think the most important and vital thing as a writer or author of color is that when you write your experience in a way that is authentic, even if it means you have to write those dark, gritty, and uncomfortable truths. And to just quickly finish up my answer, I think two very powerful feminist authors and activists that have really inspired and shaped my writing are the late Nawal Saadawi, who passed away a week ago, and then Muna At-Tahawi, because they've both said outright, we are not writing about our experiences or women's experiences to pander to the gaze of the West. We are writing what is authentic and true to ourselves.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Yousra. It was so articulate. So we have only 3 minutes more, and I'm going to dare to throw a question to all of you and see if we can take answers in under 30 seconds. I know I'm challenging like that, but my question to you is, drawing from what Yousra just shared, How do we fight the appropriation of narratives? We're all working with stories somewhere, Mandy being an activist and the rest of you working in the writing space. So Mandy, 30 seconds. How do we fight? You're on mute. Sorry, Mandy.
So for me, it's not just about pen to paper, but it's actually about being a voice for the voiceless, helping the helpless by being selfless.
Thank you, Mandy. Shazaf?
I have no idea.
I love it. Soniah?
I think it's perhaps somewhere between what Mandy said and what Shazaf said. It's a hard thing to do. Like Yousra said, we don't represent everyone. We're our own voices, our own stories. And if someone reads our words, our essays, our novels, our fiction, nonfiction, and is able to relate to that, that is the best we can possibly hope to do. We're not ambassadors to countries, cultures, or movements. We're just us.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Radhika? Mute. Unmute.
Something similar to what Yousra was also saying. Let's not try to write what we're expected to write, because that's what people see us as, and we have to deliver to it. Let's try and stick as much as possible to our reality. And at the same time, I like what Mandy said. There are a lot of other voiceless people around us who would not be able to put their reality forward. So just keep on bringing those realities out as well, so that collectively we're putting a picture forward which is comprehensive and also as realistic as possible, so that nobody can really appropriate us and create something else out of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Radhika. Yousra, would you like to take us home?
I think it's a collection of what you're all saying, really, staying authentic in your writing. And if you have that privilege of being able to write publicly, then to try and amplify other girls' and women's stories and voices.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, ladies. I wish we had the luxury of time. I wish we had the luxury of there being no pandemics. We could all be in one room to dish out this conversation with thought after thought. But I have to say, it has been an absolute pleasure to listen to each of you, even if it was just only a couple of minutes. I really look forward to the rest of the festival. I think each of us is engaged in some capacity or the other in the days ahead.
Good job moderating, Kirthi. We enjoyed your view as well.
You all made it easy. I had the lightest job in today's conversation. But on that note, thank you, Sabine, thank you, Ananke, and thank you to each of you on my screen, my 5 amazing women. I hope everybody that's been watching has had an enriching time listening to our conversation. Have a beautiful day, evening, night, morning, wherever you are in the world.